He looked her up and down, sneering at the red dress stretching tightly across her stomach. "I can't even look at you anymore." Her husband spat, walking out to a woman half her size. She thought her life was over. She didn't know the city's most dangerous man was already watching. Sophie Miller stood in front of the floor-to-length mirror in the women's restroom of the Drake Hotel in downtown Chicago, desperately tugging at the hem of her crimson dress. She was a size 24, a woman of heavy, undeniable curves. For years she had carried the weight of her body like a secret apology, shrinking her personality to compensate for the space she occupied. But tonight was her 5th wedding anniversary. She had spent weeks saving for this custom dress, hoping the deep sweetheart neckline and the draped silk would remind her husband of the woman he had married. When she walked back out into the glittering dining room, the crystal chandeliers cast a harsh light on her reality. Brent was already seated at their corner table. He didn't stand when she approached. He didn't smile. He was a successful corporate real estate broker, sharp and perpetually restless, his eyes always scanning the room for something better. "You're late," Brent snapped, not looking up from his phone. "I was just fixing my makeup," Sophie said softly, squeezing herself into the booth. She felt the immediate pinch of the table edge against her stomach, a humiliating, silent reminder of her size. "Happy anniversary, Brent." He finally looked at her, and the absolute disgust in his eyes made the breath stall in her lungs. He didn't see the careful styling of her hair or the expensive silk. He only saw her weight. "I can't do this anymore, Sophie," he said. His voice was cold, devoid of any affection. It was a business transaction. "I'm not ordering dinner. I'm moving out." Sophie froze, her hands trembling in her lap. "Brent, what are you talking about?" "It's our anniversary." "It's a wake," he corrected cruelly. He leaned forward, lowering his voice so the neighboring tables wouldn't hear, though his words were designed to cause maximum damage. "Look at yourself. Look at what you've let yourself become. You're massive, Sophie. It's embarrassing. I bring clients to events, and I have to introduce you. Do you know what they think of me when they see my wife is a fat, lazy whale?" Tears pricked her eyes, burning hot and fast. "I have a thyroid condition. Brent, you know how hard I try." "I don't care," he interrupted, tossing a sleek leather folder onto the table. "I filed the papers yesterday. My lawyer will be in touch." Before Sophie could even process the shattering of her marriage, the final twist of the knife was delivered. The maître d' approached their table, followed by a woman. She was petite, fragile-looking, easily a size 2 with sharp blonde hair and a smug smile. She was wearing the exact Cartier love bracelet Sophie had pointed out in a magazine 3 months ago. "Ready to go, baby?" the woman asked, sliding her hand onto Brent's shoulder. "Lexi, this is Sophie," Brent said, casually, standing up and throwing a $100 bill on the table for the water they hadn't drank. "Sophie, Lexi. She actually takes care of her body." Sophie sat frozen in the opulent dining room, surrounded by the clinking of expensive champagne flutes and the murmur of Chicago's elite, entirely alone. She was the fat, discarded wife. She felt the stares of the waiters, the pitying glances of the wealthy patrons. Her world collapsed in the span of 3 minutes. The divorce was a bloodbath. Brent had been planning it for a year. He had hidden assets, transferred his commissions into offshore shell accounts under Lexi's name, and hired a ruthless attorney who chewed Sophie up and spat her out. Because Sophie had given up her career as a pastry chef to support Brent's rise in real estate, she had nothing. She was left with a meager settlement, stripped of her Lincoln Park townhouse, her dignity, and her security. Hitting rock bottom felt like drowning in concrete. She moved into a drafty, tiny studio apartment in Pilsen, a gritty neighborhood far from the manicured lawns she was used to. For weeks, she barely left her bed. She hated her body. She hated the thick thighs that rubbed together the heavy apron of her belly, the soft, fleshy arms that Brent had looked at with such revulsion. But hunger is a powerful motivator. With the last of her settlement money, Sophie made a desperate gamble. She leased a run-down, abandoned corner storefront on 18th Street. The floors were cracked linoleum, and the windows were grimy, but the commercial oven in the back still worked. She named it the Flower Dust. She stopped hiding. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. She threw away the excruciating shapewear and bought loose, comfortable vintage dresses that draped over her heavy curves. She poured her grief, her rage, and her broken heart into her dough. She baked rich, decadent pastries cannoli, filled with sweet ricotta, massive sourdough loaves, thick brioche. She didn't lose a single pound. In fact, surrounded by butter and sugar, she might have gained a few. She was unapologetically fat, surviving on the sheer, stubborn will to not let Brent destroy her entirely. She didn't know that her small, warm bakery was located squarely in the territory of the most dangerous organized crime syndicate in the Midwest, and she certainly didn't know that the boss of that syndicate had developed a dangerous fascination with the heavy, beautiful baker on the corner. It was late November, and the Chicago winter had arrived with brutal force. Sleet lashed against the glass of the Flower Dust, the wind howling down the empty streets. It was past 11 p.m. Sophie was alone in the back kitchen, scrubbing the heavy stainless steel prep tables, her thick hips swaying slightly to the faint jazz playing on her old radio. Suddenly the front door violently shattered open the little brass bell, screaming as the heavy oak slammed against the wall. Sophie dropped her rag, her heart leaping into her throat. She crept toward the front counter, grabbing a heavy cast-iron rolling pin. A man was leaning heavily against the display case. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and soaked to the bone. He wore a bespoke Italian wool coat that probably cost more than her entire bakery, but it was ruined. A dark, terrifying stain was spreading rapidly across his right side, dripping thick crimson blood onto her pristine, black and white, checkered floor. "Lock the door!" He rasped his voice, a low, gravelly command that demanded absolute obedience. Sophie was paralyzed. He looked up, and she gasped. He possessed a brutal, arresting kind of handsomeness, sharp jawline, aristocratic nose, and eyes as dark and cold as the Chicago River at midnight. But what terrified her was the heavy matte-black Glock pistol gripped loosely in his left hand. "I said lock the door, Dolcezza." He gritted out, his knees buckling slightly. Survival instinct overrode her terror. Sophie rushed past him, threw the deadbolt, and pulled down the metal security grate. When she turned back, the man had collapsed onto his back, gasping for air. "I'm calling an ambulance." Sophie panicked, reaching for the rotary phone on the wall. "No!" The word cracked like a whip. He raised the gun, his hand shaking, but the barrel steady. "No cops, no hospitals, just towels." Sophie's breath hitched. She looked at the gun, then at his bleeding side. She dropped the phone. She wasn't a nurse, but she was practical. She ran to the back, grabbing an armful of clean white cotton baking aprons and a bottle of high-proof vanilla extract she used for baking. She dropped to her knees beside him. Up close he smelled of rain, expensive cologne and copper. She unbuttoned his ruined shirt. The bullet had passed clean through his side, messy bleeding profusely, but manageable if she could stop the flow. "This is going to burn," she warned, her voice trembling as she poured the alcohol over the wound. The man hissed his back, arching off the floor, his muscles coiled like tight steel springs. But as Sophie leaned over him, using her full heavy weight to press the thick wad of cotton against his side, his dark eyes snapped open and locked onto her. He didn't look at her with the disgust she was so used to. He looked at her like a starving man staring at a feast. Roman Costa, The ruthless head of the Costa Syndicate was a man who lived in a world of sharp edges, starvation, and cold, hard violence. The women in his world were surgically altered thin and brittle, but the woman above him was a vision of classical Renaissance excess. He felt the soft, heavy press of her large breasts against his uninjured arm as she reached across him. He saw the thick, lush curve of her thighs, kneeling beside him, the plump softness of her flushed cheeks, the generous roll of her stomach under her vintage dress. To Brent, she had been a whale. To Roman, she was the physical embodiment of sanctuary. She was warmth abundance, and absolute, devastating beauty. "You're so soft," Roman murmured, his blood-stained hand weakly lifting to trace the heavy curve of her hip. Sophie blushed furiously, slapping his hand away. "Keep still, you're bleeding to death." "I've died and gone to heaven," he whispered, a dark, delirious smile touching his lips before he passed out from the pain. Sophie sat with him all night, keeping the pressure steady until the bleeding stopped. Before dawn, while she was dozing against the counter, a black SUV pulled up. Two massive men in suits entered with a spare key, scooped the unconscious man off her floor, and dropped a thick stack of $100 bills wrapped in a rubber band onto the counter. They vanished like ghosts. For 3 weeks, Sophie convinced herself it was a fever dream. She used the money to fix the broken door and buy a new commercial mixer, trying to forget the dark eyes of the bleeding man who had praised her softness. Then he came back. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The bell chimed, and Roman Costa walked in. He was fully heeled, wearing a charcoal Brioni suit that fit him with lethal perfection. He looked powerful, terrifying, and completely out of place in her pastel bakery. 2 bodyguards stood outside facing the street. Sophie dropped a tray of croissants. "You." "Me." Roman smiled. It was a terrifying smile, predatory and possessive. He walked up to the counter, his eyes devouring every heavy curve of her body. "You saved my life, Sophie Miller. How do you know my name?" she whispered, backing up until her hips hit the prep counter. "I know everything about you," Roman said softly, leaning over the glass display. "I know you were thrown away by a fool who couldn't appreciate a true goddess. I know you work from 4 a.m. to 9 p.m., and I know I am going to buy every single thing in this bakery." For the next month, Roman became a permanent fixture. He sat at the corner table every afternoon, sipping black coffee and watching her with hungry, obsessive eyes. He brought her gifts rare Madagascar vanilla beans, expensive silk scarves that complemented her complexion, and a custom-made leather apron designed specifically to wrap around her wide waist. He never touched her, but his gaze was a physical weight, making Sophie feel beautiful, revered, and dangerously desired for the very body she had been taught to hate. Then came the day the past violently collided with the present. Sophie was wiping down the tables when the door opened. She expected Roman. Instead, she saw Brent. Her ex-husband looked awful. He was unshaven, his eyes manic, his expensive suit wrinkled. Lexi was